super excited for today's special guest, the incredible Stefanos from the United States of America. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. Great to be here.
So good to have you. Thank you so much for taking this opportunity to speak into modern man and rites of passage, which I think is such an important topic, particularly in today's era and when men are starting to actually really connect back in with themselves. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely an important topic on many fronts.
Absolutely. And I think as we sort of dive in, it'll be beautiful to really explore how this can be beneficial for men, for fathers, and how they can show up for themselves, but also for their sons and to be able to lead and inspire them in that direction too. So really looking forward to today. So firstly, I would just love for you to share a little bit about who you are and how you got to do or be where you are in this work.
The short answer is pain is why I'm in this work. Is I experienced, like many of us do, very pain in my family upbringing, violence, physical abuse, emotional abuse, volatility, uncertainty in my familial environment. And it really caused me to look at myself and life in a way that I didn't want to live that life myself. Of course, I did for a period of time as an adult. I couldn't or wouldn't, or it was just very challenging for me to break away from that pain until I was, of course, able to and really stepped into deeper levels of self-realization and made some changes in my life. But I felt very isolated as a kid and felt very disrupted and disconnected and just very alone there were times when I was loved, but there were times when I wasn't loved. And that was the majority of the time. And it was always waiting for the penny to drop, just waiting for something bad to happen. And I thought, well, this is just not good for children to be feeling this way and to be thinking this way and to constantly be on edge. And my nervous system was ratcheted all the time. And it's a really difficult place to be. And so I developed this fascination with relationships and the human mind and human potential and exploring what all of that meant, psychology of people, psychology of relationships. And I just started delving into, it was also a refuge for me, is delving into different aspects of being in the world. And I did that for a long time. I mean, I'm continuing to always learn and grow, but I wasn't integrating what I was learning. I was keeping it here intellectually, but I wasn't living it because I wasn't dealing with my pain. I wasn't dealing with my trauma that I experienced as a child and my fears and how all of that was unconsciously affecting me. So I understood all this stuff. Studied psychology at university, behavioral science, social psychology, philosophy, like all of this, but I just wasn't integrating it. And it wasn't until I began to integrate that, which was a catalyst. The catalyst for that for me was a relationship that I was involved in, and she discovered that I was unfaithful in that relationship. It unpacked a lot of stuff. It allowed me to come face to face with my own shame and a lot of unresolved, unhealed wounding and trauma that I hadn't dealt with and I'd pushed to the side and I'd really suppressed massively. And so fast forward to today, years later, I really dealt with the core of all that wounding and really just chose to be a different person moving forward. And that finds me where I am today. I started asking big questions about masculinity, what it means to be a man, how do boys need to be raised, how do children need to be raised, what's the importance of inner child work and trauma work and dealing with our fears and having supportive, nurturing, encouraging environments. What do rites of passage mean? How do we transition from one way of being, an old way, into a new way? What does the journey process look like? What do we have to put up with? What level of resilience or toughness or compassion do we need? And just started asking big questions, developing models and frameworks around this. And again, I was always in that space of teaching and coaching, but I started doing it now from a place of just deeper integrity and being connected to my own truth.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I think there's a lot of people that can resonate with going through such tumultuous times when they're a child and then it greatly impacting. And particularly, I know a lot of healers and a lot of coaches that do the work, that go and learn all this stuff and then they don't integrate. I see that so often. And it's in that embodiment of what we know and what we've learnt that I think truly shifts our perspective and how we show up in the world. So powerful. I would love for you to speak into what are some of the things that you have really noticed around how fathers particularly can show up for themselves and then how that can impact on their sons from that leading by example place, firstly.
Well, it's really important that firstly, fathers are available in the lives of their children. They're just available. They're present. Their presence is there. It's noted. They're not only available, but they're also reliable. So they're physically available. They're not absent, and they're emotionally available. They're attuned to. There's an attunement to the child. There's a resonance, an understanding, a connection, a feeling with that child. And when that occurs, the child feels safer to express, feels seen, feels heard, feels understood, respected, appreciated, acknowledged, basic human needs, right? And having that from the masculine for a young boy, there's a familiarity there. There's a familiarity in the maleness, in the gender type, but also in the culturally relating type. And in that familiarity, we feel safe. And that's not to say that we don't need our mothers or we don't need feminine or female figures in our lives. Definitely do as young boys. And we'll go through that in different stages as we're transitioning from boyhood to manhood, where our hormones are raging, just like women in different ways, of course, just like the female body. We need that familiar guidance, because we're so disorientated as we're transitioning from boyhood to manhood. You know, teenager is a relatively new term in modern language. It really was this transition from boyhood to manhood once upon a time. And we would go through varied rites of passages. Some were very extreme, and I don't necessarily resonate with them. However, rites of passage generally have a structure, right? But we had these structures that helped us understand ourselves, helped us temper what we were feeling that was very new to us as boys, transitioning, hormones, testosterone raging through our bodies, not understanding the growth that we were experiencing in different ways. And having men to relate to helped us feel safer and more connected to our truth. We lack that a lot in modern times because men are either absent, fathers are either absent because the divorce rates are quite high, separation rates are quite high, and there's animosity between parents, so the co-parenting isn't really amicable, or fathers are really absent because socioeconomically there's a great deal of pressure on them. And so there's a lot of things that are occurring here. And then couple all of that with emotional immaturity that's in that man. It's really a boy trapped in an adult man's body still, because they haven't processed their stuff. They haven't dealt with their emotions, their pains, their traumas, their fears. They haven't gone through the gamut of their own right, multiple or singular rites of passage in a safe way, in a way that they're seen and welcomed back to manhood and a new version of themselves. So we've got these adult men in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s having children. Maybe they're not having children that late, but they have children, but they're still seeking guidance. They're still seeking mentorship, and they're still seeking wisdom from other brethren, other men. And so this is a big pain point in our society at large today.
Oh, you answered that so beautifully. And it really is. And I think you've hit it on the head. Society is definitely not helping in that area. And I think conditioning of, men not able to show emotion, and it's weak to speak, and it's weak to show emotion, it's weak to cry, and all those things. And then you add into that divorce rates being so high, and definitely that piece where the co-parenting is really divided. It's definitely playing a huge part. So what would you recommend to men that are going through those motions of showing up every day, really stuck in their emotions or not even connected with their emotions, to be able to connect in so they can connect in with their children?
Well, they've got to do the inner work themselves. So they need a support group themselves. No man is an island. No human being is an island. We're not meant to be in isolation. We're relational beings. We're relational beings that need each other. Not in a codependent way, but in the interdependent way. So it's a healthy way to grow through our issues. That's not to say that other people are there to heal us or do the work for us. It's to say that they're there to support us and mirror and reflect back to us what we cannot see within ourselves. And so men need brethren, men need other men to have support, and and women as well. It's a community thing. I'm not attempting to separate or segregate men and women here in any capacity. However, we're also at different levels of being and learning within our social groups. And so when women do women's work, men do men's work, and we come back and we come into a gathering where, irrespective of how you identify your gender or what gender type you identify as, we come together as a humanity. But that level of familiarity and doing the deeper work in familiar circumstances, it really helps us feel safer and open up more. And that way we're releasing some of that stagnant energy, stagnant emotions, thoughts, belief systems that don't serve us anymore. And we can do that in a more profound, accelerated way. So to really be, in short, if you want to be available for your son as a father, ensure that you have a healthy outlet for expression that's outside of your partnership, outside of your family dynamic, a support group of men, friends, brethren, teammates, whatever it may be that can really support you on your journey.
Powerful. Thank you so much. So I would love to come back to rites of passage. You mentioned that briefly before. What does that actually look like for men that are listening to this and may not have ever heard that term? What does it look like and how can they connect in with this?
So it's interesting, when we look at rites of passage, there's so many varied rites of passage across different cultures. Why, we ask the question, why are so many, I'd say most, so violent or intensive or confronting? Because when we look at rites of passage, when we look at that, they've traditionally been very, again, intensive, confronting, like really deep, right? And the answer to that has been to prepare for war.
That's right.
So now the question becomes, well, is it time to change the essence of these practices, or is our masculinity intrinsically tied to the essence of these practices? And remember, masculinity and femininity reside within all human beings. And I'm of the belief that most men will carry a dominant masculine energetic, and there are evolutionary, biological, cultural, value-laden reasons for that, and that's another conversation, but just as a side note. Mm-hmm. And so look at, well, what does this actually mean? So our rites of passage today, they have to follow a structure to some degree. Like, I mean, if you look at the I'm probably going to butcher this name, Majujara, I think I'm saying it right, Majujara Aboriginal boys in Australia. They were expected, and I don't want to be rude here, you can put a caveat on the podcast, but they were expected to swallow their own foreskins after they were circumcised and cut. Oh. And this is all part of rites of passage, right? The Sambia mountain boys in Papua New Guinea, they would push sharp sticks into their nostrils to make their noses bleed, and they'd have to swallow semen after oral sex with other young men. Like they're very intense rites of passage. It's so when we look at anthropology and sociology, we're looking at these and we're going, whoa, that is intense. I mean, that's some of the light stuff. I could go into a lot deeper what some of the traditional rites of passage have been. Very violent. It's really interesting. And do we need to have those types of rites of passage today? Not necessarily. We have to, though, have rites of passages that challenge us. We have to be challenged, because through challenge, we grow into a new version of ourselves. So a basic dynamic rite of passage, and this isn't based on my work, this is based on the work of Arnold van Gennep, or Gennep. Mm-hmm. And he's described like an anthropological formula that underlies the rites of passage ceremonies. And so rites of passage and other rituals can often follow like a 3-stage sequence. That's separation, transition, and incorporation. And so separation is being away from what's familiar, maybe being in the wilderness, going on a walkabout, being alone in nature, connected with self and with nature. Mm. Now, in that separation, there's generally challenges that are involved in that. Like there's fasting, or you have to find your way back from somewhere, or you're in treacherous terrain, or you don't have access to food. There are challenges that are integrated in that. Then there's a transition period where you're transitioning from that old version of self that thought you couldn't into the new version of self that thinks that you can. And again, it varies completely. And then there's incorporation, where you're welcomed back into society. You're welcomed back into your brethren, into your brotherhood. There's other men there, your father, your uncles, your brothers, your friends, and they welcome you and see you and witness you in this new version of self that has transcended difficulty and challenge and has come into this great power. Wow, it's a big wow there, right? But we don't have that a great deal in today's society. We have it in dribs and drabs, but it's not deliberate enough. It's not welcoming enough. The man isn't being viewed. Like we look at, some of the biggest pain points for men are not being understood, not being appreciated, respected, and acknowledged. And many would say, well, that's egotistical. That's their soft ego. That's their weak personality structures. And I'm like, whoa. Let's pull back a moment here. Just wait. It's more than that. It's an evolutionary thing. We found as men over millions of years, that we had great utility in the service that we provided the people that were in our lives, our communities, our tribe, our brethren, the women in our lives, our children. And we just want reinforcement, recognition to ensure that we know that we're on the right track, that because of our physical stature as well, there's many men that don't want to take advantage of other people. And physicality plays a role in our society. And so there's deeper reasons for that, but we don't often, go too deep. But, a big issue with today's rite of passages is that we're not, for example, we have a driver's license, or we have, you can drink alcohol. And sure, whilst we're leaving an identity behind and we're embracing a new one, there's not a lot of substance to that. That we have to go through a severance period where when we talk about rites of passage, we're talking about understanding an end as severance from childhood. The middle part is a threshold, and the beginning and the incorporation into manhood. In other words, essentially a rite of passage begins with an ending and ends with a beginning. We don't really have that deliberate understanding in the mainstream of how boys are raised in today's society. And here's a big thing, and I'll say this and I'll finish there, so I don't want to get too much on a tangent. But women or females have a very distinct, clear biological rite of passage from being a girl to being a woman. And that is the menstrual cycle. We don't have that as men. We don't have that clear, distinct transition. Yes, we're growing. Yes, we're changing physiologically like women are, but it's different. That's why there are so many challenges in the past that have been put forward to boys transitioning into men and rites of passage, because men of past knew that culturally we needed that rite of passage that was very clear and distinct so that we could grow into the men that we could be for ourselves and for our community. We lack that, and it's missing in today's society. Again, there are very many rites of passage, like credit card approvals, armed services, the entry level into higher education where you qualified for university, voting rights, drinking, you're now eligible to be employed, milestone birthdays. Like, there's this stuff, but it's not celebrated deeply enough. The intention isn't there.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting to say that. My son's going for his license at the moment, and he literally said to me yesterday, he's like, Mum, like yesterday I was a different teenager, and now all of a sudden I'm getting my license. And he goes, it's changed. But you're right, there's no real clear differentiation. There's no real clear separation. There's no real clear, like, yes, you were a boy and now you're a man. And that deeply resonated. So thank you. Beautiful conversation. I would love to speak into how women can show up for their man during this period. If they're starting to connect in with their emotions, starting to do the healing work, how can women support men in this and do that in a way where the man doesn't feel emasculated? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that, there really isn't any complementary term in the language of the feminine for emasculation. It tells you something about where we're at as a society, but also how we're affected by that as men and the narrative around that. But here's the thing that's really important. Men need to firstly demonstrate that they're willing, trustworthy, and consistent. Willing to do the work, trustworthy and consistent in their behavior and how they're showing up and in their expression. And then a preference or a quote-unquote expectation we place on a woman of how she shows up. And in this instance, it's really simple: compassion, understanding, non-judgment. Men don't want to be judged for their past. They don't want to be criticized for what they've done, particularly if they're really breaking that behavior and they're demonstrating that they're changing and shifting their behavior and they're on this journey of deeper self-exploration. And we need and we desire the nurturing compassion and non-judgment and selfless way of being that the feminine within women can often express. And that can be super useful for our journey, because when we don't feel judged, we don't retract. And when we don't retract, we're more truthful. It's a cyclical thing, right? We all have to do our role. There's no us versus them. There's no separation. And so in that, when we feel more open to express, we feel safer. If we feel safer, we're going to be more vulnerable and real, but we're going to come from a more grounded place because we're still doing that work separately on our own in a self-reliant way, and also with other men in our lives. So we're not bringing the intensity of our pain to our family dynamic. We're bringing vulnerability and realness and truth. We're also bringing shift and transformation. And then when we receive that compassion and understanding from women and that non-judgment, it's very powerful. it's made a massive difference in my life. You know, it's changed my world, and I think it's one of the big reasons why I'm here today. I mean, for most men, the question of what it means to be a man is really quite perplexing in today's modern age. And I think it has been for some time. It's confusing and it's often tainted with way too much information. Mm-hmm. Most men simply just have a longing for support and guidance of other healthy masculine men, that we don't have that connection. As we learn and identify with what is considered familiar, with what I spoke to earlier, in our journeys towards masculinity, maturity, and a deeper experience with the divine, both masculine and feminine, we are yearning for this nurturing compassion and non-judgment from the feminine.
Thank you. Beautiful. I would love for you to share a little bit about how men can show up as a modern man and support their partner in raising a healthy young boy, and what a particular rites of passage could look like in a family dynamic.
Depending on the age of the boy is going to make a bit of a difference on how that boy is received and by whom he's received. As he gets a little older, as he moves into the 11, 12, 13, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, he's probably going to need more of that male masculine influence. Before that, having that nurturing feminine influence is very important. But ultimately, I think to answer your question in the most generous way is that, you know, once upon a time took a tribe to raise and a village to raise a child. Putting that pressure on only two people it can be pretty confronting. And not necessarily the most empowering way to raise a child. And so if, firstly, cohesiveness in the parent dynamic, and the balance of masculine and feminine energies, and really within self and then within the duo, within the dynamic, and then extending that to uncles and aunties and friends and people in community that boy can really rely on. He can go to not just his father, but he can go to his uncle or his father's friend or someone, you know, down the street or whoever it may be, and have that ability to connect and communicate with other people outside of just mum and dad, and mum and dad being supportive of that, mum and dad not arguing and disagreeing in front of that child, so the boy sees cohesion and strength in that, and reverence for each other. Mutual respect and adoration is very important for that boy to witness, and then allowing that boy to ask questions freely and not be judged and critiqued and rejected for his inquiry or for his expression in the world. And he can be questioned but not rejected. You know, he can be asked and he can be engaged with in a very meaningful conversation, but not completely denied who he is. And that's an important part, and parents coming together in a cohesive way around that.
Beautiful. Speaking into the rejection part, for people to understand rejection, they probably have this mental note of it's sort of pushing people away, but that's not what you're talking about. How can you explain the rejection piece around parenting a little bit clearer for our parents to understand how that actually looks and how they can actually start to take a little bit of ownership for how they could show up differently for that?
Yeah. So I'll use myself as an example. As a child, when I would express, particularly to my father, he would either make fun of that, or he was absent. He wasn't available to what I was expressing. I felt I constantly had to justify myself. So my expression and who I was being in the world was rejected by the person that I really wanted approval and love from. And so in doing that and being that person, I felt that I was wrong. I shamed myself. And I took on those beliefs. That was my responsibility. As a kid, you don't really know any better. I didn't know any better. As children, we don't know too much. The ego takes it on as if, oh, this is my fault. If it's my fault, I'll fix it. And then I'm broken now, so I'm going to fix me. And I still want the approval and the love and the affection of my parent or my father in this case, but I'm still feeling rejected. So I would start contorting myself to try not to be rejected, because it was a really uncomfortable feeling and a really painful one. And so it can damage a child's psyche and their sense of self, their self-worth. My mind was very damaged. And then we develop compensation techniques or compensatory strategies or coping strategies to deal with that pain that we're experiencing, because we don't want to experience the pain. So sometimes it's violence, sometimes it's a retraction from the world, sometimes it's a people-pleasing mentality. I was a combination of different things because I was a product of a very volatile environment, which was all over the place. So my wounding was like all over the place. It wasn't as cut as dry for me. It wasn't like, oh, I have a fear of commitment. I'll work on that. It's like, oh, I have a fear of commitment, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of everything.
I'm hearing you.
And many people experience elements of that. I'm not alone in that. But it was tough. And so as a parent, really embracing the child's quirks. And again, that's not to say that, let them do anything and everything they want. Of course, there has to be a balance of structure and guidance, but it's how we express that. Instead of making the child wrong, inquire, be curious about where the expression is coming from. And you'll find that they'll be more receptive. They'll be more truthful. Maybe it's coming from a little painful place for them, and you can discuss that with them and be more open with them. And that's really cool too. And so just not making massive judgment and not immediately pushing their expression away because it's different or because it doesn't align with something you believe in as a parent. I'm not a parent at the moment. I was in a relationship many years ago where for about 4.5 years where I was a parent. The woman I was with had 2 boys. So that's my experience of parenthood. And I've also been a son, 2 parents, and also do a lot of deep work in this space on myself. I work with people in a one-on-one capacity, relationship capacity, all of that. And so I hear these very common complaints from children. I work with young boys and young men that they're just not seen for who they are, and they have to be someone different. And that causes animosity, and it causes resentment and pain. And it causes this, I'm not enough. I'm just not enough. It's the syndrome of I am not enough. Mm-hmm. And how boys deal with that varies, but generally it can be really extreme for boys. And let me explain what I mean by that. Partly because of the biology of us as males, and going through a biological rites of passage as we're transitioning into adulthood and our hormones are raging. And I'm not blaming hormones here in any capacity. However, what it means is that if we are seeking approval and we're engaged in approval style behavior, basically what happens in our brains, this has happened to me as well, what is happening in our minds, mainly unconsciously, sometimes consciously, is like, oh, you're not going to give me attention? You're not going to see me for who I am? I'll show you. I'm going to go to the most extreme thing I can, because heightened testosterone promotes risky behavior. This is a fact. There's nothing new about this. This is not a new thing. And as it promotes this very risky behavior, guess what? We start pushing the edges, stealing cars, doing drugs, sex, pornography at very young ages. So these are all things that I engaged in different ways, shapes and forms. Violence, because we're trying to get the attention of those that aren't giving us attention and that we feel are judging us. And it's like, well, I'll give you something to judge me about, because I would hear my father say, I'll give you something to cry about, and then boom, hit me. And so like the inverse of that is, well, I'll give you something to judge me about, and I'll take it to extremes. And boys will do that.
And what would you say to parents who maybe have a teenage boy that is going through that at the moment, and maybe at a point where they're like, I don't know what to do, I don't know where this comes from? What would you say to them in how they can support their son during this period?
Yeah, well, it's a tough one. It's not easy, because my family went through my brother being, I was more covertly rebellious, whereas my brother was more overtly rebellious, and he got into drugs really heavy, really young. And my father diffused himself from responsibility from that. I stepped into that as the eldest brother and became a father at a very young age. And it was a clusterfuck, right? For many reasons.
I could imagine.
Yeah. And so I know what's needed, because I probably did the opposite. I was very violent with my brother. It was 5 years difference between us. We were violent with each other. I would go and be violent with the people that were in his peer group, blaming them, but not my brother. But what children essentially need is compassion and love, right? But even that sometimes doesn't help. And healthy boundaries too. Because boys are screaming for healthy boundaries. They want support, consistency in that support, not lip service. Oh yeah, you've got support, but then it's never really there. But consistency in how the men in that young boy's life are showing up. And at the end of the day, there needs to be a detachment as well, or a non-attachment, and a responsibility taken from the parents and the caregivers, and also a non-attachment, because they can't control fully what's happening for that boy. And sometimes you just have to go through that. My brother got himself off drugs. He didn't get himself off drugs. He had help. I helped him. We supported him. He found support, but he made the decision. And we have an amazing role. He's my love. He's my life. We're very close, very close. And we have been for many years. We went through a decade plus of really tough times. things. You know, he did that work. People got to be doing that work on their own. They've got to be ready to do that work. And he was ready. You know, when he was ready, but he wasn't ready before. You know, how many times I took him to drug rehabilitation centers and he's like, yeah, I'm going to do it. Nothing until he was ready. He's got an amazing story. I hope he writes a book one day, you know, but, you know, it's really, really interesting that we just, you know, I'm going to come back to the basics. We need to be seen. We need to be heard. We need consistency in our lives. We need to be loved and appreciated even when we think really badly of ourselves. And we just need to be acknowledged for who we are and accepted. It's like, okay, I'm not doing the best thing that carries the best interest for me or for others right now, but others seem to be still loving me while setting healthy boundaries. Like, okay, well, maybe I am worthy. We can begin to reframe and restructure that internal narrative. But it also takes time and it's a process. It really is.
Definitely. I would love for you to speak into the attachment piece. So I know particularly as a parent, the attachment piece is huge. And we attach ourselves to how they show up and how they are and their results and all of those things. So when you speak about not having an attachment, particularly to their behaviors, what does that look like for a parent? How do they not have attachment but still love?
It's with great difficulty. So the attachment piece stems from a masculine energetic. And the masculine energetic is that goal orientation, is that completion energy. And so we have this idea of how something needs to be or should be. My boy should be raised this way. My boy should turn out this way. My boy should behave this way. And that is a completion or a goal orientated or an objective orientated energetic, which is very masculine, which is a product of the world that we live in. Masculine is not bad. We need it. We just don't need it all the time. Otherwise, it would be singular and it wouldn't be called masculine. It would be called something else. We wouldn't live in a realm of duality. Go figure. So we need masculine and feminine energies just in different times, in different ways. You know, like if you've got a deadline for a project that's really important, being in a passive energy is probably not going to help. You have to be in a more active energetic, which is more masculine. That doesn't mean that men are going to get shit done better. No, women are really effective at that. You're a mother. I bet you have many instances where you have been very directed. That doesn't mean you're a man or you're just in a we call it a masculine energetic. You can call it a doing energy as opposed to a being energy. So there's no masculine, feminine, or gender dynamic attached to it at all. The non-attachment piece is tough because essentially, not only does it come from masculine energetic, it comes from unresolved wounding within ourselves. Because so many parents, so many individuals want to live vicariously through our children. So it's like, oh, I've had a child. Can't wait for them to be an amazing sports star. I never was that, but it's going to be me. Or they're going to play the piano and they're going to do this. And in fact, if I'm really insecure and really weak in my psyche, in my emotional being, and I'm really immature in all of that I am, I'm going to have them do everything. Be the next Prime Minister of Australia or the president of whatever country. They're going to play an amazing instrument. They're going to be part of the national orchestra. They're going to be a star athlete. And it's like, whoa. When you heal all those parts of you that have been wounded as a child, you won't project that onto your child. They won't feel that unconsciously. They won't feel that they're not enough because you are deeply satisfied with who they are, because you're satisfied with yourself as a human being, as an adult. So you guide them from a place of greater maturity, connection to self, and revelation of who you are. And I think that's the most profound thing we can do for ourselves and our children is get our shit in order. So we don't unconsciously and consciously project that onto our children.
What would be one key piece of advice for dads or for parents that you would love to leave this on?
You know, in addition to what we've spoken to, it's really important to show our children how much we love ourselves. So, for me, I've spent most of my life really being hard on myself because that was the environment I grew up in. I saw my mum and my dad be really hard on themselves. I saw them hate on themselves and hate on each other. I developed that attitude without being willing to change it because it was too painful to go into all the attachments around that and all the work that was required to change that. What I've found is that the biggest gift we can give anyone else, whether it's a fellow peer or a brother or a sister, a mother, a child, whatever it is self-love, loving ourselves at a really deep level. I think when we do that, we free ourselves of expectation and rigidity. We free ourselves of constricted fear and restriction. Moves us into space and freedom and love, and the children in our lives pick up on that. From the ages of 0 to 6, 0 to 7, children are walking around in a hypnagogic state. Their brainwave state is one of high receptivity, and psychologically as well. And they're absorbing everything, and they're taking it for gospel, taking it for real. Like if you say to a kid, "Oh, you f***ed up," they just think, "Oh, I am a f*** up." Like that's how they take it. And so when we come from a place of self-love, we don't project. We don't bring that pain into our other relationships or into our romantic partnerships either. Or at least we do it far less, and with greater awareness, we can come back from it without being ignorant, unaware to the pain that we have, we're carrying, and that we're bringing into our relationships, not knowing.
And that's exactly what this podcast is about coming back to self and realizing from that place of centeredness how we can show up in the world. This has been an incredible interview. Thank you so much for your time. I would love for you to share how people can connect in with you if this resonates with them, and where they can find you, follow you, and if you've got any special offers that you would love to share.
Yeah, so thanks for that. So you can find me on social media at Stefanos on any of your favorite social media places. I'm even on TikTok now. I love TikTok. I think it's great for many reasons. Just got on there a couple of months ago. So at Stefanos, or you can jump on one of my websites. It's called Grow with Steph, STEF, growwithsteph.com. And you'll find a heap of free stuff there and resources and information about how we can work together. But there's I think it's an amazing assessment on identifying what your core wounds and fears and love blocks are, to stopping you from having tremendous and amazing love here and now. And it's so under 7 minutes assessment, but it's pretty comprehensive. And then, depending on what your core wounding is, I'll take you through a journey on really how to begin to heal that at a deeper level. So I'm really excited about that. So you can access that there as well as a love block quiz.
Love it. I'm actually going to go jump on that right now.
Amazing.
This has been an incredible opportunity to speak with you. I honor how you show up in the world and what you're bringing to the world and everything that you are about. So thank you for being here, for sharing this, and for just being you in the world.
I appreciate you very much. Thank you.